The morning started like any other peaceful day on New Sol Colony. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft orange and pink colors. In the heart of the settlement, a beautiful garden served as the meeting place for everyone who lived there. This wasn't just any ordinary place, though. New Sol Colony was special because it brought together dozens of different alien species, all living side by side in harmony. The colony had taken years to build, and even longer to establish the delicate peace that existed there. Diplomatic agreements had been carefully crafted, with each species respecting the other's customs and traditions. It was a shining example of what the galaxy could become when different worlds worked together, instead of fighting each other. On this particular morning, 6-year-old Hana Kim was doing what children do best, playing without a care in the world. She had found her favorite red ball and was bouncing it around the garden, giggling as it rolled between the colorful flowers and strange plants that had been brought from various worlds. Her parents had taught her to be careful around the different visitors who came to the colony, but to a child, the garden felt like the safest place in the universe. The peaceful atmosphere was about to change dramatically. Word had spread through the colony that morning that the Vectar delegation would be arriving soon for their scheduled negotiations. The Vectar were known throughout the galaxy as a proud warrior race. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick, muscled bodies covered in natural armor-like skin. Their faces were angular and fierce, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to see right through you. When the Vectar finally arrived, their presence immediately changed the mood of the entire colony. Even the adults who were used to dealing with various alien species felt a chill run down their spines. The delegation moved through the colony with the confidence that came from centuries of conquest and warfare. At their head walked War Prime, Thakvor, the most intimidating figure anyone in the colony had ever seen. Thakvor was massive even by Vectar standards. His scarred hide told the story of countless battles, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had never known defeat. But what drew everyone's attention were the ceremonial bone spears he carried. These weren't just weapons. They were sacred artifacts that represented the very soul of Vectar culture. The bone spears had been crafted from the remains of the first Vectar warriors who had died in battle defending their homeworld. Each spear was decorated with intricate carvings that told the story of ancient victories and honored the memory of fallen heroes. To the Vectar, these weapons were more precious than gold or jewels. They represented everything their people stood for: strength, honor, and the willingness to die for what they believed in. As the delegation set up their ceremonial display in the garden, the bone spears were arranged in a precise pattern that had been used for thousands of years. The other colony residents gave the display a wide berth, understanding instinctively that this was something sacred and not to be disturbed. The Vectar guards stood at attention nearby, their own weapons ready, though this was supposed to be a peaceful negotiation. Little Hana continued playing with her ball, unaware of the tension that had settled over the garden. To her young mind, the tall aliens were just another group of visitors, no different from the blue-skinned Andorians or the tentacled Zephyrians she had grown up seeing around the colony. She had been taught that all the different species were friends, working together to make life better for everyone. The ball bounced higher than usual, and Hana chased after it with the boundless energy that only children possess. She was laughing and calling out to her ball as if it were a pet that might come back to her if she asked nicely enough. The ball rolled across the garden path, past the benches where elderly colonists liked to sit and watch the ships come and go, past the fountain where teenagers often gathered to talk about their dreams of exploring the galaxy. Then disaster struck with the kind of innocent mistake that children make every day. The ball rolled directly toward the Vectar ceremonial display, coming to rest right next to the most sacred of the bone spears. Hana ran after it without thinking, her small hands reaching out to grab her toy so she could continue playing. In that moment, as her tiny fingers wrapped around the ball, her elbow bumped against the base of the display. The carefully arranged bone spears, which had stood in perfect formation for the ceremony, began to wobble. Time seemed to slow down as the most sacred weapon of the Vectar people tilted, teetered, and then crashed to the ground with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent garden. What happened next would change everything for New Sol Colony, and would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of galactic diplomacy. The news traveled faster than anyone thought possible. Within just a few hours of the incident at New Sol Colony, a quantum burst transmission had crossed the vast emptiness of space to reach Earth. This wasn't the usual slow communication that took days or weeks to arrive. This was an emergency signal, the kind that only got used when something terrible had happened. On Earth, in the gleaming towers of Strategic Command Headquarters, alarms were going off. The building that usually hummed with quiet efficiency was suddenly alive with urgent activity. People were running through hallways, their faces tight with worry and anger. Something big was happening, and everyone could feel it in the air. Director. Minji Lee had been in her office reviewing routine reports when the transmission arrived. She was known throughout the command structure as someone who never lost her cool, who could handle any crisis with calm professionalism. But as she read the details of what had happened to little Hana Kim, something changed in her expression. Her jaw tightened, and her eyes took on a hardness that her staff had rarely seen before. Within 30 minutes, she had called an emergency session of the Strategic Council. The most powerful people in human space dropped everything they were doing and gathered in the secure conference room deep beneath the headquarters. These were men and women who had spent decades carefully building humanity's reputation as peaceful explorers and traders. They had worked tirelessly to establish trust with alien species across the galaxy. Director Lee stood at the head of the long table, looking at each council member in turn. Her voice was deadly quiet when she finally spoke, but every word carried the weight of barely controlled fury. She told them about 6-year-old Hana Kim, about how she had been playing innocently in a garden that was supposed to be safe. She described the moment when the Vectar warrior had struck down a child for an accident that any reasonable being would have forgiven. The room fell completely silent as she continued. The Vectar delegation had not only hurt an innocent child, but they had then claimed diplomatic immunity and fled back to their ship. They showed no remorse, no understanding that what they had done was monstrous. To them, a human child's life was worth less than a piece of metal and bone. But what made everything worse was the response that had come from the Vectar Empire when Earth had demanded justice. They had laughed, actually laughed at the idea that humans might be upset about the incident. They saw humanity as weak, as a species that could be pushed around without consequences. They had refused to even consider handing over the warrior who had nearly killed Hana. For 50 long years, humanity had carefully crafted an image of themselves as peaceful beings who preferred exploration and trade to warfare. They had smiled at insults, overlooked aggressive behavior from other species, and always chosen diplomacy over confrontation. The galaxy had come to see humans as harmless, useful for their technology and trade goods, but not a threat to anyone. What the galaxy didn't know was that this peaceful image was carefully maintained. Behind the smiles and trade agreements, humanity had been preparing for the day when diplomacy would fail. They had learned from their own violent history, and they understood that sometimes peace could only be maintained through strength. Admiral Taiho Choi had been waiting for this moment for decades. He was a man who understood that the universe was not always a kind place, and that sometimes good people had to do terrible things to protect the innocent. When Director Lee gave him the authorization code, he didn't hesitate for even a second. The Eclipse Protocol had been humanity's most closely guarded secret. Across human space, in systems that the galaxy thought contained only research stations and trading posts, something extraordinary began to happen. Ships that had been registered as scientific vessels suddenly revealed weapon systems that were decades ahead of anything the galaxy had seen before. Space stations that were supposed to be studying stellar phenomena transformed before alien observers' eyes into military command centers. The peaceful exploration ships that had been humanity's face to the galaxy opened hidden compartments to reveal firepower that defied everything other species thought they knew about human technology. Research vessels that had been collecting samples and studying alien cultures suddenly bristled with weapons that could crack planets in half. Within hours, the entire human fleet had been transformed from a collection of peaceful explorers into a military force that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. But this wasn't just about having better weapons or more ships. This was about showing the galaxy that humanity had been holding back, that they had been choosing to be peaceful, rather than being forced into peace by weakness. The message that went out to the Galactic Congress was simple and direct. There were no threats, no angry words, no demands for war. It simply stated that the individuals responsible for attacking Hana Kim should be turned over for justice, and that failure to comply would result in appropriate consequences. The response from the Vectar Empire came back within hours, and it was exactly what humanity had expected. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity stopped pretending to be harmless. What followed wasn't a war in any traditional sense. Wars had battles, heroic charges, and dramatic confrontations between opposing forces. This was something entirely different. This was a demonstration of what 5 decades of careful planning and patient preparation could accomplish when directed by cold, methodical anger. The Vectar Empire had ruled through fear for centuries. Their massive fleets had conquered dozens of worlds, and their warriors were legendary throughout the galaxy for their brutality and effectiveness. They had never faced an enemy that refused to meet them in open battle, and they had certainly never encountered opponents who seemed to know their every move before they made it. Lieutenant Nari Lim had been stationed aboard the stealth reconnaissance ship Shadow Walker for 3 years, officially conducting deep space surveys in the outer regions of Vectar territory. In reality, she and her team had been mapping every supply route, communication relay, and strategic installation in the Empire. They knew the schedules of cargo ships better than the Vectar captains who flew them. Through her advanced targeting scope, Nari watched as supply convoy Delta 7 made its routine run between the agricultural world of Kethmar and the military fortress of Thekshan. The convoy consisted of 6 massive cargo haulers, escorted by 4 Vectar destroyers. It was the same route they had taken every month for the past 5 years, carrying food and supplies to feed the garrison that protected one of the Empire's most important strategic positions. The convoy never had a chance to realize they were under attack. One moment they were cruising through space, their crews probably talking about shore leave and complaining about military rations. The next moment, they simply weren't there anymore. No explosion lit up the darkness of space. No distress signals screamed across the communication channels. They just vanished as if they had never existed at all. Nari allowed herself a small smile as she whispered into her communication device. Her team had spent months perfecting this technique, using technology that the galaxy wouldn't understand. For another century, the ships hadn't been destroyed in any conventional sense. They had been displaced, moved to coordinates that would leave them drifting in empty space until their life support systems failed. This was happening all across Vectar territory. Human teams that had been positioned years in advance were now revealing their true purpose. What the galaxy had assumed were cultural exchange programs and scientific expeditions had actually been the most extensive intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history. Every human diplomat, trader, and researcher had been collecting information, mapping weaknesses, and preparing for this exact moment. Communication arrays that had served the Vectar Empire for generations began going dark one by one. These weren't random attacks or acts of sabotage. Each target had been carefully selected to maximize disruption while minimizing the chance of detection. The humans had studied Vectar communication protocols for decades, and they knew exactly which relays to hit to cripple entire sectors of the Empire. The military academies that had trained Vectar warriors for centuries became scenes of horror. Overnight, instructors who had shaped generations of soldiers were found floating in space, their bodies perfectly preserved by the cold vacuum. Students who had dreamed of glorious conquest never woke up from their dormitory beds. The methods used were so subtle that Vectar medical examiners couldn't determine what had killed them. On the breeding colonies that ensured the continuation of the Vectar species, mysterious illnesses began appearing. These weren't random plagues or natural diseases. They were precision biological weapons that had been designed specifically to target Vectar physiology while leaving other species completely unharmed. Entire generations of Vector children began dying, and their doctors were helpless to stop it. Commander Junho Yang directed these operations from his command ship, which remained completely invisible to Vector sensors despite being positioned right in the heart of their territory. The Phantom Strike was a testament to human technological advancement, incorporating stealth systems that made it effectively undetectable to any known scanning method. From his command center, Junho could see the entire scope of the operation, unfolding across holographic displays. Each successful mission appeared as a small green indicator on his tactical map, and the green lights were spreading across Vector space like wildfire. His teams were executing their assignments with clockwork precision, guided by intelligence that the Vector couldn't have imagined humans possessed. When his communications officer informed him that the Galactic Congress was demanding that humanity cease its hostile activities, Junho's response revealed the true nature of what was happening. This wasn't a war between equals. This wasn't even a conflict in any traditional sense. This was an extermination campaign being carried out with surgical precision by a species that had been underestimated for far too long, the Vector military. Machine that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries found itself completely helpless against an enemy that fought like no opponent they had ever faced. Admiral Subin Park stood on the command bridge of humanity's most powerful warship. Through the massive viewing window, she could see Vector Prime, the homeworld of the aliens who had hurt little Hannah. The planet was burning, but not from bombs or laser weapons. The humans had used something much more precise and terrifying. They had created special viruses that ate only Vector technology. These engineered diseases spread through their cities like wildfire, consuming their computers, their vehicles, their power systems, and their weapons. But they left everything else untouched. The buildings still stood empty and silent, like monuments to what happens when you cross humanity's one unforgivable line. The silence on the bridge was broken by Captain Do-Yun Lee, who approached with the latest battle report. His face was grim but determined. "Admiral, the final Vector stronghold has fallen. Our intelligence network estimates there are fewer than 10,000 survivors left, and they're scattered across 40 different star systems. They're running and hiding, but we're tracking every one of them." Admiral Park nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on the dying planet below. "What about the ones who actually hurt the child? The leaders who ordered the attack on little Hannah?" "War Prime Thekfor and his personal honor guard were located on Kepler Station 3 days ago," Captain Lee replied. "When our forces surrounded them, they chose to end their own lives rather than face human justice. They knew what was coming." The Admiral's expression didn't change. It didn't matter that the main culprits were already dead. The message humanity was sending to the galaxy was much bigger than just punishing the individuals responsible. This was about making sure that no species would ever think about harming a human child again. Dr. Seong Min, the head of humanity's biological warfare division, appeared on the communication screen. His laboratory was filled with advanced equipment that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Behind him, teams of scientists worked around the clock on humanity's final solution to the Vector problem. "Admiral, I'm transmitting my final report on Operation Clean Slate," Dr. Min said. His voice was calm and professional, as if he was discussing a routine medical procedure. "We have successfully catalogued and tagged all Vector genetic markers. Our hunter-killer nanites have been programmed to locate and neutralize any surviving member of their species who attempts to reproduce. These nanites were microscopic robots, smaller than bacteria, that could travel through space and find their targets anywhere in the galaxy. They were designed to prevent the Vector from having children, ensuring that their species would slowly die out completely." "What's the timeline for complete extinction?" Admiral Park asked. "Based on our calculations, the Vector species has approximately 18 months before they cease to exist entirely," Dr. Min replied. "Even if some survivors manage to hide in the deepest corners of space, they won't be able to continue their genetic line. Their species will simply fade away." Across the galaxy, other alien civilizations watched in absolute terror as an entire species was being systematically erased from existence. The Vector had been one of the most feared warrior races in known space. For centuries, they had terrorized weaker civilizations, conquering planets and enslaving populations. Many species had tried to fight them and failed. Now the humans were wiping them out, like they were deleting a computer virus. What frightened the other aliens the most was how efficiently and methodically the humans worked. They didn't act out of rage or hatred. They approached the extinction of an entire species like it was a medical procedure or an engineering problem. They had turned their own immune system into a weapon, and they used it with the precision of surgeons. The humans had blockaded every vector world, cutting off all supply lines and communication networks. They had infiltrated their computer systems and turned their own technology against them. They had released diseases that specifically targeted vector biology while leaving other species completely unharmed. It was like watching a master chess player systematically corner their opponent until no moves remained. The Galactic Congress, the governing body that represented hundreds of different alien species, held emergency session after emergency session. They sent desperate messages to Earth, pleading for mercy and asking the humans to stop their campaign of extinction. They offered to put the remaining vector on trial, to exile them to uninhabited worlds, to do anything other than completely wipe them out. But humanity's response to all these pleas was complete silence. No replies to their messages, no representatives at their meetings, no negotiations or discussions. The humans had made their decision and nothing would change their minds. They would continue their work until every last vector was gone from the universe. The silence was more terrifying than any threat could have been. It showed that humanity wasn't acting out of emotion or revenge. This was a calculated decision, made by an entire species that had decided another species should no longer exist. They were as unstoppable as a force of nature and just as impossible to reason with. Other alien species began to understand a terrible truth about their human neighbors. These weren't just another intelligent species trying to find their place in the galaxy. These were beings who would commit complete genocide to protect their children, and they would do it with the same calm efficiency they used for everything else. The message was spreading across every world, every space station, every colony in known space. Never harm a human child, because humanity will erase your entire species from existence without hesitation, negotiation, or mercy. 8 months had passed since that terrible day when little Hannah Kim was hurt. The hospital room was quiet except for the sound of small footsteps. For the first time since the attack, Hannah was walking again. Each step was careful and slow, but she was doing it. Her physical therapy had been hard and painful, but she never gave up. The room was filled with colorful toys and gifts. They came from everywhere, from planets humans had never even visited, from space stations far away, from colonies on the edge of known space. People she had never met sent her things because they heard what happened to her. They loved her simply because she was human just like them. Hannah didn't understand why everyone was being so kind to her. She was just a little girl who wanted to play and be happy. What Hannah also didn't understand was why the alien visitors to the hospital looked scared when they saw humans now. When the alien doctors came to check on other patients, they moved quietly and spoke in whispers. Their eyes would dart around nervously when humans walked by. Something had changed in how they looked at her species, but Hannah was too young to know what it meant. Director Minji Lee stood outside Hannah's room, watching through the large window. She could see the little girl playing with a stuffed animal that had come from a mining colony 3 systems away. The child's laughter filled the room, and for a moment Minji allowed herself to smile. Behind her she heard footsteps approaching. Admiral Taiho Choi walked up beside her, carrying a datapad with his final report. "The Vector species no longer exists," the Admiral said quietly. His voice was calm and professional, as if he was discussing the weather. "The last member of their species died 6 days ago on Rigel Colony. It appeared to be natural causes, but our advanced technology made sure that nothing of their genetic material could ever be used to bring them back." Minji nodded slowly, still watching Hannah play. "Were there any complaints from other species about our response to what they did?" "None at all," Admiral Choi replied. "In fact, something interesting happened. The Galactic Congress held an emergency meeting last week. they created something called the Child Protection Accords. Every species in known space signed it. The agreement states that any harm done to human children will be treated as an attack on our entire species. It gives us the right to respond with complete elimination protocols. This meant that if anyone ever hurt a human child again, humanity had the legal right to wipe out their entire species. Every government in the galaxy had agreed to this. They had seen what humans were capable of when their children were threatened, and they never wanted to face that fury again. Minji's smile grew wider as she watched Hana giggle at something her nurse had said. The little girl was healing, both in body and spirit. She would grow up in a galaxy that was much safer for human children because of what had happened. Good, Minji said softly. Let them all remember why Earth was originally classified as a death world by the Galactic Survey. It wasn't because our planet was dangerous or because we had deadly animals. It was because of what we're willing to do when someone threatens our children. The Admiral nodded and walked away to file his report. Minji stayed a few minutes longer watching Hana play. The child had no idea that her suffering had changed the entire galaxy. She didn't know that an entire species had been erased from existence because they had hurt her. She was just happy to be walking again and playing with her new toys. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal across human space. Trade ships began moving between planets again. Diplomatic meetings resumed in the great halls of the Galactic Congress. Alien species continued to work alongside humans on joint projects and shared research. On the surface, everything seemed the same as it had been before. But underneath this normal appearance, something fundamental had changed. Every alien species now carried a deep, terrifying knowledge about humanity. They had learned that humans were capable of completely destroying another species, and they would do it without hesitation if their children were threatened. What made it even more frightening was how humans behaved afterward. The humans didn't brag about what they had done. They didn't make threats or act aggressively. They continued to be polite and diplomatic. They still smiled during negotiations and shared meals with alien colleagues. They acted exactly the same as they always had. This courtesy and normalcy made other species even more nervous because it showed just how easily humans could switch from friendly neighbors to ruthless exterminators. Every alien parent now taught their children a simple rule: never ever hurt a human child. Every alien government added new laws to their books, making it illegal to harm young humans. Every alien military included special training about protecting human families. They all understood the message that humanity had sent across the galaxy. The message was clear and simple: hurt a human child and your entire species would simply disappear. It wouldn't matter how advanced your technology was, how many planets you controlled, or how many allies you had. Humanity would find a way to eliminate every single member of your species, and they would do it while maintaining perfect diplomatic manners, as if nothing unusual was happening at all. This was the new reality that every species in the galaxy had to live with. Humans were no longer seen as just another intelligent species trying to find their place among the stars. They were now understood to be something much more dangerous, a species that would commit complete genocide to protect their young, and do it with a smile.